This is officially an update to a series of meetings here in the Elders Circle about 3 years ago. We had collectively nodded at the suggestion that we should be updated every so often as to the state of our environment and our world. Now, it turns out, is every so often. 3 years ago, we explored how troubling events, primarily climate change, were coming much faster and more intensely than reported in the rare news clip we might see. The average report of that time would mention climate measures, mostly temperature rise, sea level rise, and extreme weather, in terms of the new Paris Accords and voluntary compliance with limits that spoke of lofty goals of mitigation that would cap our global temperatures at 2°C or possibly 1.5°C by the often used target of 2100. By the way, during the Paris conference, all parties knew full well that we were headed for a minimum of 3.5°C by 2100, even with full compliance by all parties within the Paris Accords. In these 3 years, we've gotten a clear view of who we, the people with wealth, power, and privilege, are in terms of our commitment to the continuity of life on the planet. Much has changed in 3 years. Much has been revealed. Very little of it is good news. Here's our 3-part update. 1, the climate change update. 2, the larger Earth system update. And 3, the predicament. Let's get going with number 1, the climate change update. In these 3 years, we've seen the IPCC, the scientific body that establishes the measure for climate change, has stopped using 2100 as the reference point for some vague and distant pesky problem of struggling polar bears. In 2018, they shifted to a far more urgent timeline of action aimed at 50% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by no later than 2030 and 100% stop of fossil fuel use and emissions by 2050. There are currently no countries on track to meet those targets. The USA has formally withdrawn itself from this global agreement. In roughly 30 years of public, scientific, and political conversation of climate change, humanity has emitted 50% of the total greenhouse gas emissions we have caused since the beginning of human history. In 1 generation, we have steadily increased our global consumption of fossil fuels to a level that is now 100 million barrels each day. Here's a short list of change measures to date: temperature rise, sea level rise, and extreme weather. Extreme weather, it has become increasingly evident that we are in the middle of a global increase of climate-intensified natural disasters, including bomb cyclones, hurricanes, floods, droughts, and wildfires. These events and their frequency and cost are predicted to grow exponentially for the foreseeable future. The cost in the USA for the damages produced by climate-aggravated events in 2017 was $300 billion. 2019 has already seen unfathomable devastation of cities, habitat, and farmland in Australia, the USA, and Mozambique, to name but a few. Sea level rise. In his new book, The End of Ice, Dar Jamail relays climate change-caused sea level rise projections correlated with the rise in CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Past mass extinction events in Earth's history show that with every CO2 rise of 100 parts per million, sea level rises 100 feet. To date, humanity has caused an increase of more than 130 parts per million of CO2 since the beginning of our industrial age. This implies a sea level rise of over 130 feet that is baked into our near future. Climate scientist James Hansen, in a 2016 report of findings, projected that sea level rise would be coming at a pace of approximately 1 meter per decade. Temperature rise. Again, Dar Jamail, in one of his climate dispatch posts with Truth Out, relayed projections from the International Energy Agency that continuation of business as usual would produce global temperature rise of 6°C by 2050. BP and Shell both have published their working projections for near-term temperature rise of 5°C by 2050. These temperatures are often described by the most conservative climate communicators with the words catastrophic and uninhabitable. Now, let's move on to part number 2, the larger Earth system update. A central assertion in this update is that climate change is actually not a fully accurate name for what we are experiencing on Earth. We are asserting that climate change is but one symptom of many of the collapse of Earth and human systems. What follows is an extremely short list of cornerstone species and Earth habitats that are critically compromised by our business as usual human operating system. Forests. Critical mass of the world's boreal and tropical forests have shifted from their historical role as carbon sinks, absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, to being net carbon producers. Deforestation alone destroys some 150,000 square kilometers each year, the size of Japan, equivalent to 24 football fields every minute. Oceans. Since 1970, phytoplankton has reduced in population by 50%. Phytoplankton generates 50% of the oxygen in the atmosphere, in addition to being a cornerstone species within the entire ocean food chain. By 2048, all the world's coral reefs are projected to be dead. Similarly, by 2048, all global fisheries are projected to have collapsed, meaning either devoid of fish stocks or unable to be fished for human consumption. Species extinction. A jaw-dropping 2011 UN statistic reported in our meetings 3 years ago that we are losing 150 to 200 species every day to human-caused extinction was recently raised to 200 to 250 extinctions per day. Global wild animal populations have dropped by 67% in this past 50 years. Continuing that trend shows a virtual elimination of all remaining wild animal populations by 2026. This is often called Project Year Zero. Insects. Numerous independent studies around the world show a population drop of between 70 and 90% of insects in a wide range of global locations. Most of these locations report a concurrent co-extinction of birds and other predators that feed on insects. These massive drops in population are attributed to pesticide use and climate change-induced temperature rise. Finally, segment 3 of our update, the Great Predicament, that the fossil fuel-driven human operating system that propelled us to our miraculous 20th century crescendo of wealth, prosperity, health, and creativity is the very thing we must stop if we are to leave any species standing in our wake. This point is best delivered by one of the world's most skilled and boldly truthful science communicators, Christine Mattis. Professor Mattis shares, the climate crisis, as many other environmental issues, isn't a scientific problem. It's a social, political, and economic one. As they say, it isn't rocket science. It is greed. A Green New Deal will not cut it because it leaves capitalism, corporatism, imperialism, and consumerism in place. We aren't going to science our way out of these crises. We can't advertise or market our way out, shop our way out, sing and dance or entertain our way out, fundraise our way out, engineer and genetically engineer our way out, protest our way out, text, tweet, Snapchat, or Instagram our way out, pray our way out, or even vote our way out. Our way out is to dramatically alter much of our way of life. It is to prioritize ecological concerns and do our best to conduct every aspect of our lives sustainably, rather than just pay lip service to our belief that climate change is real, or that plastic pollution is a problem, or that fossil fuel use is unsustainable. In many, if not most ways, we just simply need to stop. Our way of life is incompatible with the continuance of life. Science communicator Christine Mattis. If you're comfortable doing so, close your eyes and invite a few long, full, easy breaths. Allow yourself to breathe and soften and notice what you're sensing right now. Notice any emotion or lack of emotion you might be feeling. Notice any thoughts you might be having.